Today's video is an hour-long compilation of horror stories to scare the bejesus out of you. You can listen to this video in the background while mowing your lawn, shopping for groceries, or while baking a delicious chocolate cake. Fair warning though, you might not get enough sleep after finishing this video. You can always leave timestamps down in the comments so your fellow listeners can use it to skip through stories they've listened to. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit the bell icon to turn on notifications so you won't miss our next uploads. Thank you, and enjoy the video. Not a ranger, but I used to be in a group that's somewhat like the Scouts, so we spent a lot of time in the woods and some weird crap happened often, but most of the time it was easy to explain. One thing though that to this day scares the living crap out of me. I was a leader of the age group 8 to 10 years old and we were out on a camping trip. It was the first year we stayed on that terrain and it was huge. Normally, we tend to explore the majority of the terrain before the kids arrive, so we were aware of any possible dangerous spots to avoid. Every camp we have what we call a night game. It's usually a scary game in which the kids have to complete several tasks while the leaders scare the ever-loving crap out of them. Obviously, we had one too during that camp. We masked up as monsters and hid out in the woods close to the checkpoints they had to pass. While running in between checkpoints, I found an open stretch of forest with little to no foliage, so it was ideal for chasing after them. There was no real room to hide besides behind trees, so I couldn't use my flashlight or they'd be able to see me from miles away. It was dark, like the unsettling kind of dark that plays tricks on your eyes, and you start imagining things that aren't real. During my stay there, I saw a shadow that was around my size, running past me a few times. I couldn't see it very well, so I just assumed I was imagining things because nothing was there when I turned my flashlight on. The game was nearing its end, and I saw the shadow again. This time, I could see it vaguely standing near a tree not too far away from me. I thought it was one of the other leaders hiding to scare kids and decided to go over there as it was about time to go back. I aimed my flashlight towards the tree, and while getting closer I noticed that there was indeed someone standing there dressed in what looked like a torn burlap sack and had their head covered with a few white plastic bags that looked like they were tied together. I started to feel pure dread. Something felt really off. I asked if everything was okay, but they didn't respond. The only thing I heard was this weird sound that sounded like someone knocking on wood. Nevertheless, I went a bit closer until I was about 10 meters away from this person. The knocking sound turned out to be that person smacking his head repeatedly into the tree, and I noticed he looked like a male. He was barefoot and his arms and legs were covered with crusted mud. His hands were in a weird, cramped position. I was convinced this was just one of the other leaders pulling a prank, so I told them to knock it off. He slowly turned his head and started walking towards me. Something inside me just told me to run. It didn't matter if it was just a stupid prank and I ran away scared for nothing. If this wasn't a prank, it felt like I was in serious danger, so I ran as fast as I could. I heard him running after me, but I didn't want to turn around and look as I'd probably run into a tree. I arrived back at the campsite, and every single person that could be dressed like that was already there. They couldn't have gotten there before me, and if they did, they sure as hell didn't have the time to change into their regular clothes. Still, I told them, and that they gave me a good scare with that. They just looked weird at me, thinking I was trying to scare them, and we left it at that. The next day I went to go check it out. Who knows, maybe some weirdo ate the wrong mushroom and might be out there dying from hypothermia. I took someone else with me just in case, and there were nothing but endless trees. We arrived at the tree where I saw the person banging his head, and there was a dead, skinned, decomposing rabbit nailed to the tree. We called the cops. They looked around quickly and brushed it off as just a prank from another scouting group or some kids from the nearby town and left it at that. We didn't notice anything weird after that, so it probably was a dumb prank, but seriously, some people have an effed up sense of humor. That makes me sick to my stomach. I couldn't imagine seeing something so horrifying like that in the dark. Stuff like this really makes me wonder what's hidden in the wilderness. It also makes me want to never find out, but out of curiosity, what camp or park were you at? Nope, lake and F this country. Yeah, prank or not, that sounds pretty legitimately terrifying. That's definitely not something you want to take a chance on. Unless you've got a baseball bat, then you could prank them back, right on the head. I told this story on Let's Not Meet, but I'm happy to tell it again. In 2016, my boyfriend, now my husband, and I went camping in eastern Pennsylvania. The place we decided to stop for the night was primitive. Camping was free, no cell service, barely a road, etc. We did encounter 2 other people. They might not factor into what happened later at all, but they were creepy, so I'll describe them. The first was a woman who had her truck off to the side of the road a little as we drove past. She had the hood open and seemed to be waiting for someone to stop and offer to help. Usually my boyfriend has no problem helping someone, but he said this time something about her put him off. She didn't really seem like she needed help, and usually people who need help look at you hopefully as you approach. She looked like she just expected we would stop. That's what my boyfriend said anyway. I hadn't really noticed anything that strange about her. The next person came when we had chosen a spot and were setting up a fire for hot dogs. I noticed people drive by a few times, but my boyfriend pointed out each time it was the same car and the man in the car watched us each time he passed. My boyfriend was a little uneasy about this, but we had driven around for a while before finding a place we liked. It had been raining and everything was muddy, and we wanted the driest site possible. He could have been doing the same thing. We briefly thought about moving, but the road was muddy too. If he wanted to find us, all he had to do was follow the tracks. There were some other tracks, but not many. He'd only have to backtrack a little to locate us again. He didn't come by another time, so we stayed and spent the several remaining hours before dark goofing off. No one else drove by. Whether or not those 2 had anything to do with our experience, the real fear came later. We had gone to sleep in our tent, and sometime around 3 a.m. we were awoken by this very loud noise. I can't describe it very well or even remember exactly what it sounded like, but my boyfriend said it reminded him of a chain gun revving up. It was also similar to how it would sound if someone recorded a shovel being dragged over gravel and played it over a loudspeaker, is another way he described it. The sound repeated itself another few times. I was too scared to speak, so my boyfriend whispered that it was probably miles off and I should go back to sleep. I didn't question this, as I figured loud sounds could be easily heard miles off. After we left, he told me it sounded like it had actually been coming from just down the road, but he didn't want to freak me out. Looking back, I probably should have wondered why he would bother to whisper if apparently the sound was far off. I was still terrified. Every little thing I heard outside sounded like someone was walking around the tent. We lay there for a while longer when finally my boyfriend told me to get dressed because we were leaving. I got alarmed by this and even more alarmed when he unwrapped the machete we had bought just for this trip from its plastic before opening the tent. We quickly packed up and loaded the car. I looked around for footprints that weren't our own, but despite the moon providing plenty of light, I couldn't really see. I did point out something my boyfriend hadn't noticed before we got into the car. There was a beer can by our dead fire that hasn't been there before. We didn't even bring beer. While we were driving away, my boyfriend explained that he was nervous someone might have tried to lure us out, so he didn't think it was a good idea to run from the tent right away. He also half expected to find out the gas tank had been siphoned out, but that wouldn't have stopped us because we had a hybrid car. We joked that that would make a funny hybrid commercial. Number of brutal murders avoided by driving a hybrid? 2. We only joked because we were about crapping ourselves from fear and adrenaline even then. The rest of our trip, we only stayed in well-populated campsites or got a hotel. You know, I love camping, but I've mostly only stayed in somewhat more populated campsites. I've often said, I should really get out there and do some real camping. And after reading this story, I think the next time I set up my tent, it'll be in my own backyard. I have so many of these, but I'll share my favorite. I've been a ranger in the USFS almost 15 years, but this takes place about 3 years after I joined. We were getting calls about a lone wolf with a collar hanging around campsites. Weird, since wolves aren't known to be in the area, but when you work in the field long enough, you start to realize anything is possible. No calls had mentioned violent behavior from the animal, thank God. I departed from the station around noon to check out the places that it had been sighted. Wandered around for about 3 hours, no further calls during that time, until I took a break for water. Sat down, had a snack, drank some water, and was getting ready to go again when the thing was about 20 feet out, trotting near the tree line. It seemed friendly and had the collar, so I whistled at it and he came over to me. Getting a closer look, I could see it wasn't a wolf. It was huge, but it was dark and didn't have the right body structure, though I could see why it'd be confusing from a distance. I radioed in and reported that I had the dog with me, but as soon as I said I'd bring it in, the dog effing took off. Like he was playing to see how far he could get me to chase him, typical dog behavior. I went after it, and I swear it was a game of chase for at least 5 minutes as we steadily ran through the forest. Please don't go running through the woods unless you know the area like the back of your hand. The dog finally slowed down near a rock bed/creek area and started pacing around a spot. I drew closer and didn't see anything off at first, then I noticed that the overgrowth had almost disguised what appeared to be bones. I called it in immediately and another team was sent to recover the remains. When I went to retrieve the dog, he was just gone. But honestly, it wasn't a priority at that point. He was friendly enough and I figured we'd catch up with him later. The bones were identified as a teenage male's, died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He'd been reported missing in the area long before I became a ranger, and there'd been pretty much no hope of finding him. I spoke to his mom on the phone. She called to thank me personally, and she asked how I'd found her son. I mentioned the black dog, then thought I'd said something wrong since there was a pause on her side of the line. After I gave a couple details about the dog, she quietly explained that her son, who struggled with making connections, had sunken into a deep depression after the death of his best friend, the very dog that had led me to him. I think I spent the rest of the day stunned. I continue to be in disbelief in a way, but I know what happened. So this feels like the kind of story we've all heard before, but the OP definitely told this in a way that makes it feel a little more legitimate than most. I'm not 100% sure why, and I'll still call myself a skeptic, but stories like this, well, they make me want to believe. They really do. I've told this on here before, but my husband is out of control with his sleep talking. You almost can't call it sleep talking because you could swear this mother effer knows exactly what he's doing. It isn't just talking. He gets up out of bed, will literally be walking around the house doing things like he's totally aware. Could hold a full conversation with you. It takes a minute to realize whether he's awake or not. He's so sure of himself. So probably the scariest thing was one night we're knocked out. It has to be like 3 a.m. and his big A bolts out of bed like I've never seen in my life, waking me up and frantically yelling, "We have to go now! We have to get out of here! Follow me! Hurry up!" I literally go into full panic mode and start trying to grab things and get my dog, all while asking him what the F is going on, but he's so serious about this that I just trust that there must be something bad happening. Within a minute or so, I noticed that as frantic as he was walking around, he wasn't really doing anything, just kind of going in circles. At that point, it clicked that he wasn't really awake. I had been woken up from a dead sleep too, obviously. So I started saying his name over and over and telling him it was okay, and he kind of just snapped out of it and was like, "Oh, sorry about that." Definitely was freaked the F out for a minute there. I remember one night I was on a school trip. We were visiting a shipyard in the 5th or 6th grade. We were all sleeping in bunks at the prow bow of the ship, stacked 3 high. One of the kids was known for having night terrors, as they happened at other sleepovers and such out of school. I'm a notorious insomniac, so naturally I was up with another bunkmate of mine and we were playing cards. This kid was on the 3rd bunk up and all of a sudden leaped off. These bunks are 3 high, you have to climb down. This kid jumps like 8 feet, lands like a cat, and bolts for the bathroom. One of the teachers woke up and saw this and got up to make sure he was okay. The kid was dead asleep the whole time and once properly awakened, apologized and climbed back into bed. Was wild to see. Sleepwalking was one of those things that I was weirdly worried about as a child. I was like, oh no, what if I sleepwalk into the street and get hit by a car? Thankfully, I've never had to deal with that. Only the rare bouts of sleep paralysis, which I guess is like the opposite problem? Not so much creepy as it is odd, but I overheard my wife accurately recite my social security number aloud whilst sleeping. When I told her about it the next morning, she said I had to have been making that up, and she definitely does not know my social security number. I didn't believe her and made me swear to me and on our marriage that she wasn't lying, and she said that if someone was pointing a gun to my head and that he would pull the trigger unless she accurately recited my social security number, she'd tell me she loved me and that she'd remember me fondly once I died. It was the oddest thing. I think it's possible that she may have seen the numbers briefly at one point but doesn't consciously remember them. We supposedly dream with faces of people we've seen in our lives, even if they were random strangers we've passed by in the street and never given a second thought to. So maybe it's registered in her subconscious but not her conscious memory. My girlfriend, now wife, and I were sleeping in my bed in college. Due to not being able to control the temperature in my room, which was kept at a tropical 105 degrees despite it being a brutal winter, we always slept with the window open and my bedroom door cracked for circulation. I also lived in the ground floor apartment of a brownstone in Boston. In the dead middle of the night, she starts smacking me. Girlfriend, babe, babe! I startle awake. What? Girlfriend, there's someone standing in the doorway. Adrenaline starts pumping. I prepare to fight the intruder. I quickly scan the room for something to make an impromptu weapon out of. Finally, my eyes adjust to the dark. I'm fully awake and I see that no one is actually there. Me. No, there isn't. You're sleeping. Girlfriend. She had zero recollection of the entire incident the next morning. I had to recount to her how she almost made me crap my pants in the middle of the night. The laugh at the end makes me think that your girlfriend's subconscious is a bit of a prankster, and frankly, that makes me really appreciate her. Here's hoping that she keeps stuff like that up, because that's hilarious. I posted this in a similar thread months ago, but it's relevant. Same house, same bedroom, different women, 5 years apart. First woman, we're asleep in bed and she takes this huge, deep breath that wakes me up. Then she says, "They are here now and want to speak to you. I'm gonna let them use me." So of course, I wake her up violently like, what the F? All she can tell me is that she saw several shadowy people in her dream who told her that they had a message for me but needed her to talk to me. Okay. Second woman, we're asleep together and the same things happen. Deep, long breath that wakes me up, except this time she screams, "There are people in this room with us." I got her to calm down by assuring her that we were alone. She never sleeps over again. I sold the house. LOL. Joke's on you, the shadow people were gonna tell you about the yet-to-occur surge in real estate prices and to hold off on selling it for a few years. You would have made bank, but no, you just couldn't let them speak. My fiancé is super active while sleeping. It used to bother me, but now I'm used to it. One time I asked her to give me her pillow while she was sleeping, and she said, "Okay," and then pulled it out from under her head and threw it at me. She slept the rest of the night without a pillow and was quite peed when she woke without a pillow and after I told her what she did. My significant other frequently moves around the pillow and the covers when she's asleep, often resulting in her not having a pillow and not letting me put one under her. The first time she did it, she called me a snake for stealing the pillows. I'm still not sure if she fully believes that it's not me. I was rearranging my pillow nest in the middle of the night and he must have felt threatened. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, no, whoa, put these down, whoa, whoa, please, no." Some other delightful experiences. Him barks loudly like an aggressive, ferocious dog. Me wakes up completely due to mini heart attack and screams. Him whines softly like a chastised dog. Me, it's okay, go back to sleep. Him, me falling back asleep. Him, no, you go back to sleep. Me, just lie down. Him goes from a 90-degree angle to a 45-degree angle, and his sleeping self pretends to be asleep, and in doing so achieves true metastatus. Me, I know you're not lying down properly. Him, yes, I am. Me, okay, whatever. I don't know what is up with these sassy sleep talkers, but I am loving it. I wish my partner was a sassy brat in her sleep. Sadly, the only sass I get is when I wake her up with my snoring. Not my significant other, but still kind of funny, but very scary at the time. So, little me had a nightmare and went to my parents' room to tell my mom and get a cuddle so I could go back to sleep. I knocked on the door and opened it very quietly so only mom woke and not my dad, since mom is a very light sleeper and dad a heavy one. I get in and at the moment dad jumps out of bed and shouts, "I do not want to see you here again!" I fled up the stairs and cried and mom followed me and told me she didn't know what happened either. Dad says he doesn't remember it, but I sure do. My wife doesn't talk in her sleep, but I did wake up once to her sitting up, leaning over me, and staring at me paranormal activity style. It was terrifying, and she has no recollection of it. I woke up to my wife screaming the most horrifying, blood-curdling scream I'd ever heard. Something made her wake up, and in the faint moonlight that was seeping in through a gap in the curtains stood a small figure less than a foot from her face. It was our son wanting a drink, but he had decided to stand next to her head like a mannequin until noticed. My girlfriend will do this every so often, but this one time she was having a really bad nightmare and she just straight up screamed at the top of her lungs right into my face. I woke up with an adrenaline rush that is still my closest guess for what C feels like. I woke her up by stroking her hair and whispering to her that it would be okay, and she thanked me the next morning. Sorry, that must have been terrifying at the moment, but I can't stop laughing trying to visualize this scenario, haha. I thought she was awake, but we were lying in bed last week, and this is how it went. Girlfriend, I'm gonna crap myself. Me, what? No, go to the bathroom. Girlfriend, I'm gonna crap the bed. Me, why don't you just go to the bathroom if you've gotta poop? Girlfriend, what? That doesn't make any sense at all. I'm trying to make these trees grow. Just shut up. This is when I realized she was sleeping and started laughing hysterically, which made her angry. She didn't remember any of it the next morning. You know, eventually there's gonna be an outtakes compilation released, and there's a good solid 30 seconds that I had to cut out from that one. I swear, I am an adult, but I could not get over, I'm gonna crap the bed. I have two stories. One, I work in the electric train department of Amtrak in the Northeast. One night, we had a report of wire theft in a remote location along the Harrisburg Run, and we were sent out to investigate. Typically, the work crew gets there before the police, so we'll usually hang back a bit until the men with guns get there in case the perpetrator is still there. We show up and see some wire hanging and some guy laying on the ground. We assume he hit a live wire, got fried, and is now dead. We walk up and shout to the guy, but we don't get a response. After about 10 minutes, the police show up and start taking pictures of the scene. One cop grabbed a stick and poked the dead guy a few times just to make sure. No movement, definitely dead. The cop with the camera takes a picture of the dead guy. When the flash goes off, the dead guy jumps up, screams the loudest scream I've ever heard, and takes off running. The cop with the stick starts chasing after him with the stick above his head, while his partner and our crew just stand there trying to figure out what the frick just happened. 2. I was on a standby crew at night during a storm with 2 other guys. I was put on a piece of equipment called a cat car while the other 2 guys decided to hang out in the truck. With the cat car running to keep it warm, I decided to lock up and take a nap. I locked both doors with padlocks on the inside so there was no way anyone could get in without me letting them in. A few hours later, I awoke to some heavy wind and decided to check with the other guys to see if our supervisor had called with any trouble. When I got to the door, the lock was missing, but I couldn't open the door. The same with the other door. I called the other guys to come help, and when they got there, they asked how I managed to lock the cat car from the outside. If you're not quite following that, the padlocks that were originally on the inside locking the only 2 doors into the equipment were now on the outside. The 3 of us couldn't figure out what happened, but it creeped me the frick out. I would want to say that, there is maybe some sneaky maintenance way to get into that car, and maybe one of your coworkers snuck in, got the locks, and put them on the outside as a prank, but you would think they would, own up to it. Otherwise, it's kind of a weird prank. Automated rail track inspector here. I've worked on inspection vehicles all around the world and actually have not seen as much weird stuff as some people who have already commented. The weirdest for me was on a track in Philadelphia. I was riding with the TME on the rear deck. He was a really cool guy and was pointing out all the landmarks next to the track. Mostly there were Rocky references, but I hadn't seen the film in ages and the locations were lost on me. We were driving up and down the same stretch of track all day near the Rockies gym, if I recall correctly. It was really run down and it looked like we were driving through a landfill site with all the city rubbish just poured down the embankment. On this trip, the TME was watching out and was uncharacteristically quiet. Out of nowhere, he shouts to the driver to sound the horn, and out of nowhere, all these cokeheads just appear. There were guys walking around spaced out, women with their boobs out, needles hanging out of arms, that type of scene. That sight really messed with my head. It was the lowest form of humanity. I asked the guy what the F. He said that around this time each day, the dealer visits that area, so all the homeless guys living in that crap get their high. Women and men will do anything to get their hands on that crap. They sound the horn so that they can see the people who usually get up and start walking about. If they didn't, they worry that a high hobo will just walk out in front of them. Now, here's the weird crap. We entered a tunnel, and at the other end, the land was cleared out, and there are allotments up the embankment. For 500 meters past the tunnel, the land is all clean and organized and marked out with crops and plants growing. There are guys standing watching us pass holding pitchforks and other gardening equipment. The TME explained that these were pensioners from the same project. They cleaned up the land and used it to grow crops and food. They were standing by the tunnel to guard from the cokeheads on the other side. Best and worst of humanity separated by a tunnel. I worked in a rail yard. Not out on the rails themselves as an engineer conductor, but we saw a few interesting things. My buddy saw what he thought was a black garbage bag laying inside the well of an intermodal car. We have to remove any debris as the shipping containers won't fit in properly. He reached in to grab it and quickly pulled it up only to discover it was a dead vulture. Feathers fell off and he dropped it and began screaming and running down the tracks. I was hysterical. I told him he still had to get it because it was on his side of the train. Best story though was working the overnight shift. Train came in and was parked. A few hours later I see a disheveled man walking around looking lost. I had heard stories that we occasionally still get hobos riding the rails. And this gentleman was my first. Official railroad policy is to call the cops and have them arrested for trespassing, but the unwritten rule was if it appeared they were not trying to steal or vandalize anything, to just escort them off property. I asked the guy if he's looking for the exit, and he said he was. I pointed it out to him, and he thanked me. He turns and said, "Hey man, where the heck am I? I've been riding the rails all day and fell asleep. I had to get the heck out of Baltimore." I looked at him and said, "Baltimore?" He looked confused. Apparently he got on the train at the rail yard across town, rode over to a classification yard, fell asleep, and woke up in our yard across town. 6 hours, and he had gone about 5 miles. He was peed. I was trying not to laugh as he was muttering to himself out the gate. Working in a tunnel with 2 other colleagues one time, and we all heard a woman screaming down the tunnel, like in the films when a woman sees a dead body or a man with a gun, kinda loud, hysterical screaming. 2 of us start sprinting toward the noise, and after 5 to 10 minutes we realize there is nothing there at all, no noise or sign of people. We are so sure we heard screaming, we go to the next station supervisor who informs us there's absolutely no one working around that was close enough for us to hear. We were in the deep underground section and we all heard that same noise that was creepy. I've heard a colleague speaking about walking alone in the tunnels, again away from all people close to him at night, and hear someone whispering, and another colleague hears chains at an abandoned station. I'm not a supernatural person, but I've no reason to doubt these guys' stories as they were told to me one-on-one. Very quiet when you're on your own underground, so it could be mind playing tricks, I guess, but still a creepy experience. Also, to lighten up the spookiness, there are a few women who actively flash train drivers from their houses that back onto the train lines. Never seen any of them, but been in a cab with different drivers talking about it happening. The whispering is probably easy enough to explain. Human brains are great at pattern matching/recognition. If there's enough low-level random background noise from echoes and such, our delicious brains will try to form it into something recognizable. Kinda like people saying Jesus and toast. So never worry your tasty brain in deserted tunnels about it. It's definitely not zombies. I'm glad that someone else got to be the one to point out the trickery of the human brain that wasn't me. It is good that this logical and very trustworthy commenter is someone you should definitely let near your delicious brain. I am a freight conductor. We hit a young lady walking between the 2 main tracks at like 5 in the morning. That sucks, and dead bodies are creepy on their own, but the craziest part was that I thought we hit 2 different people. The woman that I saw was white, heavyset, and in her late 40s. She was walking toward the train, leaning out in front of us. When myself and the brakeman walked back to find the woman, what we found did not match what I saw. She did not go under the train, so she was mostly in one piece. We found a Latin woman who was very thin, and I later found out in her early 20s. Now I thought I was crazy, but the brakeman started asking me if we had hit 2 people and described the woman in her 40s the same as I had seen her. Needless to say, we only hit 1 person. He and I were convinced that this young girl was possessed by some evil entity. The face I saw before we hit her still pops into my mind occasionally. It was evil, twisted, and full of pain. Somewhat relevant, I am a station attendant and have a few stories. Found a dead kangaroo on the train, so I had to lock off the carriage to the train. Had to stop a transgender lady from being on the tracks who was attempting to commit self-termination. I think it was a bad breakup. Trains were canceled so she wouldn't be hit, managed to calm her down and convinced her to get up and call a friend to meet her. Had to stand in the way of a deranged woman who threatened to jump in front of a train until the police arrived. Had a homeless person steal an artificial plant after I stopped him from breaking into one of the train station shops. A lady's handbag managed to pull an escalator step out. She wanted her handbag damages to be paid by the rail company. We said only if she paid for the repairs of the escalator. Lots of fricking and adult toys in strange places. Friend of the family is now retired railroad man. He was in a caboose during World War II on an ammunition train when it exploded, and he somehow got out alive. Another time, very close to the same place of the explosion, they had to stop the train one night. Engineer called back saying they were going to be there a while so he could get off and stretch his legs. He did just that and stepped off a bridge and fell about 20 feet and broke a leg. I was a volunteer fireman. One 10 below zero day, we were called to a body on the tracks. I expected a body in 5 or more pieces. He was rolled up in a ball instead. He had been there all night wondering how long it took to thaw him out. Second body on track, he was in at least 5 pieces. Though it was an accident, a letter was found in his home saying he was going to kill himself. Clinical psychologist here. I used to work in a prison and did a parole evaluation for an inmate that was a high-ranking gang member in a national gang. By his account, he was the highest ranking in the state. In fact, he was placed in that prison to hold his people accountable and keep the peace. He had a long violent record and was, in my opinion, a genuine psychopath. Part of the eval is discussing the crime and assessing remorse and whatnot. He was so clinical in his description of how he tortured and left this guy to die over an unpaid debt. Live by the sword, die by the sword was his phraseology for the act, like it was nothing. He was also very nonchalant about his ability to take care of his business while inside. I believed him. He'd only spent 18 months of his last 15 years outside of prison. My recommendation was not to parole him. There were various factors that I gave, and in the end, the parole board went with my recommendation. So the part that actually scared me, this was my first parole eval, was this guy's ability to affect the world outside. He could have sent someone to my house if he had wanted to. I had no doubt about that. More experienced psychologists told me not to worry about it. Then he knew the score and wouldn't take it personally. I had a hard time buying it. I was running a long-term offender group a few months later, and he was part of it. After the first group, I pulled him aside and asked if we were good. He smiled at me and told me not to worry. I did my job, and he didn't blame me for writing what I did because it was true. He went on to be a really insightful and active group member. Criminal defense lawyer here. A lot of those guys basically understand that we exist in the system, but that we're in a different role than they are. So they might kill a guy for shorting them on cash because he's part of their world, but not be upset at the prosecutor who sends him to jail for a decade because that prosecutor isn't. It's an interesting disconnect. An interesting and frankly pretty good disconnect to have, too. I would think it would be a lot harder to find people who might be trying to help these folks if they had to be more worried about their clients than I'm sure they naturally already are. Obligatory, not a psychologist, but I used to work as an aide in a special education classroom in a middle school. The year I started, a majority of my workload was 8th grade boys, and 2 of them had deeply troubling behavioral issues. One kid assaulted a girl in his class, at school, in front of a bunch of other kids. He actually got arrested for it, but the school couldn't expel him because of his disability. For the rest of the year, he was forbidden from being anywhere, including the lunchroom, with her. I spent a lot of time essentially babysitting this kid. And because he didn't give a frick about school, he did practically nothing during his time in the resource room. The last I heard, he'd been arrested again for breaking into someone's house and stealing a handgun, but the one who scared me was completely antisocial to the point of threatening to hurt himself or others when a field trip or school assembly was coming up. We eventually had to tell his parents in advance so they wouldn't bring him to school. He talked about death constantly, all while extremely medicated, so it was a very muted, mumbled, and done through a 1,000-yard stare with spittle coming from his mouth. One of the teachers was pregnant. She wasn't his teacher, but he knew who she was, and one day he asked me, would Mrs. X's baby live if someone ran her over in a car? I told him I didn't know and tried to change the subject. Then he asked, what if someone cut her stomach open? What if they stabbed her? What if she had been dead for a while and no one found her? This really freaked me out, and I had to report it to the SPED teacher. When I told her, she said he had asked her and other students the same thing and scared the crap out of them. She said the pregnant teacher had been advised to avoid him in case he did or said anything to upset her. Not being able to kick a kid out because of their disability is absolute bullcrap and is endangering people. Schools are supposed to be a safe environment, and crap like this really ducks that up. I mean, you definitely want to handle kids who have special needs with consideration and understanding, but when they've assaulted someone and pose a danger to others, I guess I don't know what I would do differently. I don't want them to miss out on getting help and education, but the person assaulted has a right to feel safe in a school. Ugh. Therapist in training and my tutor, who is a childhood abuse and trauma specialist, tells some horror stories. The one that stood out for this question was a guy in his mid-40s who had lived most of his life with extreme paranoia that his parents were sending people to get information from him to blackmail him with. This guy was extremely unstable and was legally obliged to go to therapy after committing some petty theft because he believed his parents were tracking his money. Anyway, he'd been going for about 6 weeks, and he began to talk about a plan for the future. He was kind of vague, but said he had worked out a way to break free from his childhood and move forward. My tutor was apprehensive but hopeful. He had been making good progress in the previous sessions. Fast forward a week and this guy is back again. He's noticeably agitated and carrying a large sports bag. My tutor remarks that she's pleased to see him and likes his new bag. He breaks down. He confesses that he has a machete in the bag and had planned to kill everyone from his old life, starting with his therapist, so he could be free from his past. But she was very nice and would be hard to kill. My tutor politely excused herself and called the police. The guy was very compliant. He'd pretty much given up at that point, but the police confirmed he did indeed have a large machete in his bag, and his car was full of bin bags. She said that was the only time she felt she was close to dying, and says the moral of the story is to treat all your clients well because you never know who's plotting your murder. Good life advice, not just regarding clients, but people in general. I feel like it might be off-putting for a therapist to have a katana mounted above their desk and maybe some printed certificates saying that they're black belts and stuff. It just doesn't seem the most professional, but maybe not a bad idea. When I was studying psychology my final year, I had the opportunity to meet with convicted felons. Essentially, I sat down and spoke to a man in his 30s-ish who was a S offender. He told me he used to marry women and then R their youngest daughters. Each was in the range of 6 to 7 years old. I listened to him explain it. It was literally my instructions not to judge them. I had to sign a waiver to not get emotional. So I asked him about the home life of those he abducted. He said that some of the women he married had other children, and in one case there was an older sister who was 13, but he would never ever touch her. He would drop her off at school, where he told me he was never into any of the children he saw, and take her to practice and friend's house, and while she was gone, he'd go back and R her 6-year-old sister. He told me that it really isn't always about being attracted to prepubescent girls, it's about the dominance and power that comes with having intercourse with them. Hess is rehabilitated now, though. Weird part was that I wasn't sure if he was acting remorseful, because if he was, he is amazing at it. He was just very open to my questions and expressed regret, and I almost believed him. However, when I met a man who was convicted of CP, his "I feel terrible" was transparent and so full of crap it was disgusting. My professor warned me about manipulation, so that was easy to catch on to, but with the previous guy, he was either an impeccable liar and manipulator or he genuinely wanted to get better. Crazy. This is freaking terrifying, and my blood ran cold reading it. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm all for rehabilitation over just punishment in prisons, and I'm aware that some of these people are this way because of problems in their brains that they struggle with, but I don't want to forgive and rehabilitate people who have done those things. Maybe that is hypocritical, but I can't. That's crossing a line. I regularly had hallucinations before I got on my antipsychotics. Still get some today, but they're nowhere near as vivid as they used to be. I saw a lot of tall, pale humanoid figures with no facial features. Scared me crapless when I read the Slender Man creepypasta. Also saw plenty of nondescript shadows. One time I saw one near my pantry looking like it was sorting through the food. That actually made me less afraid since I imagined it was just grabbing a snack, laughed my butt off. My tactile hallucinations were the worst. I would feel itchy all over or felt like bugs were crawling over my skin. My auditory ones were the less frightening ones. I'd usually just hear voices that were too quiet to understand. I felt like I was hearing someone else's conversation in passing. I've been on my meds for 4-ish years now, and I'm doing so much better. I still hear or see the occasional thing, but overall I do not hallucinate anymore. Me and the Demon Boys at 2 a.m. trying to find some of that shredded cheese. The scariest thing I saw was I was biking to a friend's house around the corner from my house. I felt something behind me and looked back, and there was this pitch-black humanoid figure riding on the back of my bike. I crashed the bike. Friggin' rude hallucination. Laugh my butt off. Friggin' rude got me to snort. I get sleep paralysis quite often. Scariest one was when I was 11. I was sleeping on my back with my head to the side looking at my wall. I woke up looking at myself in the big mirror on the wall. Mirror me was staring back, but he wasn't paralyzed and looked like he wanted to kill me. I had sleep paralysis a few times in my teens and early 20s, but haven't had an episode in way over a decade. My hallucinations were primarily tactile and auditory, but that crap is absolutely terrifying. Every once in a while, I'm about to fall asleep and remember that crap, and just like that, I'm awake for another half an hour. I have bipolar, and before I was diagnosed/medicated, I had auditory and visual hallucinations, also known as psychotic symptoms. The auditory ones included someone screaming my name, the sentence, "Big Brother is watching," over and over, and a male voice screaming. The visual ones I had were frickin' scary. I woke up and saw my arm covered in spiders, which didn't go away when I swatted them. And I saw a guy in thick-brimmed glasses and a hat looking back at me from inside my black TV screen. Hopefully I don't come across as too crazy to you all. I thankfully haven't had any serious symptoms in about 6 months. Antipsychotic and mood-stabilizing medication is a godsend because hallucinations are no joke. I saw a dude with a girl walking in front of me. Girl was normal, so was he, except the part in which he had a black rotating void instead of a head. I once had this dream where I was in the middle of a fancy party, but everyone else there was static as if the time had stopped. The most interesting part about it was that everyone had a rotating void instead of a head. Really dope dream, to be honest. The creepiest thing I've seen while hallucinating? When I was maybe 14 or 15, I had seen a tall, lanky silhouette at the bottom of my stairs. Its head was facing up to me, but I couldn't see any facial features. It reached out with one of its arms up to me, but before anything else happened, I closed my eyes and stood there for about 5 minutes, maybe 10. I opened my eyes and poof, it's gone. I don't know if you'd class that as creepy though. Search SCP-096, basically what you described. That does sound creepy, but I do have to say, if you close your eyes for 5 to 10 minutes and it was gone, I'm not sure I would say, poof, it's gone. I'm pretty sure an elderly person with a walker could vanish in 5 to 10 minutes. So I was tripping on acid, and anyone who has tripped on acid knows that hallucinations aren't always visual. They can be sensory, auditory, etc. Anyway, I beat my meat whilst trying to contemplate the concept of adult entertainment and how it plays a role in the universe. When I nut, I felt my thoughts leave my brain and shoot out of my dong, like my actual thoughts. They were lost forever. At first I read that as photography, and I was thinking how true that is, like the photos of the monks immolating themselves, and that awful napalm photo that definitely helped swing public opinion and helped end the Vietnam War. Or those Dorothea Lange Dust Bowl photos. Then I realized you said P, not photo. Never mind. My creepiest was an auditory hallucination after taking too much Benadryl. Every few minutes I would hear my mom yelling my name along with bursts of a man laughing. It was crazy scary. Had to put the TV on and wait the 4 to 6 hours it took to wear off. I had some visual hallucinations when I took too much Benadryl one night. I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at millions of tiny spiders crawling all over my shower for a few hours. I've only hallucinated once. I was a bit sleep-deprived and driving home from work at 3 a.m. As I came over the hill crest, I saw a guy run out in the middle of the road from the brush on the side. He stopped right in front of me and started waving his arms, begging me to stop. I slammed on my brakes so I wouldn't hit him. When I looked back up, he was gone. I had to pull over and catch my breath after that one. I had something similar but less frightful happen to me. I hadn't slept in 3 days, new third-shift job and full-time student, and was driving home from work. I looked out the window to my left and saw a huge 10-foot-tall man riding an ATV down the road. I didn't think too much of it for a moment, but then realized how stupid it was for me to be driving and so sleep-deprived. Promptly quit that job. Yeah, folks, don't drive sleep-deprived. Some of those I wouldn't even call a hallucination, but honestly, the start of sleep and dreaming. If you're driving a road, you know you might actually fall asleep and dream the familiar road you're taking without realizing it. That crap is seriously just as dangerous as drinking and driving. Like, you basically start sleepwalking but driving. Only thing is, eventually that dream is not going to be accurate and you're off the road. I had sleep paralysis as a teen. Now I know how to control it, so I'm not bothered anymore. I saw and heard plenty of stuff, but I remember once I saw something that scared me so bad I didn't sleep for 2 days afterwards. I was afraid of falling asleep. It was an old lady dressed in an 18th century, all in black with a veil on. She wouldn't move when I looked at her, but would come closer and closer when I was blinking. At some point, she was right next to me, but would not do anything. She would just stare at me. It was really scary because I saw every detail, lace, wrinkle, hair. I could hear her breathe and feel her presence. To give you an idea, she looked like the old lady from Insidious, but less evil and more detailed. Still gives me the chills when I think about it. It's pretty tame, but when I woke up in the middle of the night recently, I clearly saw a huge spider gliding down from a light from the ceiling. I switched the light on rapidly and saw nothing. I even searched the floor and under my bed until I was fully awake and realized I had just been seeing things. Dude, I literally saw the same thing once, but it was a neon green spider crawling towards me. Ugh. I was in an old mansion in Chicago as a young child. There was an interactive play in the basement with Disney characters, but I suddenly needed to go to the bathroom, so 7 or 8-year-old me left to go upstairs. Huge mansion, but narrow staircases. You wouldn't even be able to stretch out even one of your arms to the side. But I was walking up the stairs when I suddenly saw a lady in a white wedding dress at the top of the staircase. It was the type of wedding dress they wore in the olden days, and I guess that she was just part of the activities downstairs, so I smushed myself against the wall so she would be able to walk down. She stood at the top of the staircase until she suddenly jolted forward and fell down the entire staircase. It kind of seemed like she was pushed, now that I think about it. But when she reached the bottom of the staircase, she laid there motionless with her head in a weird angle, now knowing that she probably broke her neck. Child me panicked and ran upstairs so I wouldn't get blamed for what just happened. When I came back, she was gone. I eventually forgot about it, but then once I was at camp and I was talking to some friends about paranormal activity, my friend then started to tell a story about how she saw a woman in a wedding dress fall down a staircase and die in the exact same place I saw it in. So maybe it was a hallucination, or maybe ghosts are real. Shrug. I'm not one to believe in paranormal stuff, but that is way too much of a freaking coincidence. Or maybe you both just saw an actual murder, ran away, and when you came back, the body was already taken away. Or maybe your friend at camp was the murderer and knew you had seen it and was trying to figure out how much you knew. I had a breakdown a few years ago, and 2 of the worst I have had happened during that time. So usually when it happens, it's shadow people type stuff or flickers of eyes staring at me from pictures. It gets more intense when stressed and or tired. So one time I kept seeing a scruffy man in a black leather jacket stalking me and hiding in illogical places. For some reason I didn't think too much of it until I saw the vision in my closet very suddenly staring past me. When I looked back, it was gone. Scared the crap out of me. Also saw the same figure sitting alone in the living room in the middle of the night. The only light in the house at the time was light cast from a street lamp outside through the windows. The other one was when I thought the house was on fire. I was watching videos on my phone in my bedroom. Ironically, the channel on YouTube was called Dan Is Not on Fire. In the blink of an eye, things went from "it's a nice sunny day today" to "holy frick, the house is on fire." I yanked out the earbuds, tossing the phone on my bed, and bolted out of the building. I could see smoke and the light cast on the wall from the flames. Every smoke detector was screeching. I threw the front door open and leaped out. I felt like I fell but never hit the ground, then things were abruptly calm. Everything was quiet compared to what I had witnessed. Seconds later, one of my housemates casually walked out with laundry, further perplexing me. I asked him if he saw anything odd while he was in the house, and he said no. I walked back inside and everything was normal. One of the other people I lived with had some family over in the living room for tea even. I went to go see a doctor later that day and was told it was caused by stress. It was by far the worst hallucination I have had so far. Sure, giant spiders and melting faces are unsettling, but the more realistic ones are the ones that scare me the most. That genuinely sounds pretty terrifying. The idea that your brain can so fully convince you that this stuff is happening. I've known people who would be like, just put your hand in the flame and you'd realize it isn't real. But in the moment, your brain will be like, no, I feel the heat. It's definitely real. They aren't like holograms. I tried DMT once and was told by friends who had done it before me to pretty much not to stop inhaling until I couldn't. So I did that and ended up standing in a field, then a large Aztec temple raised in front of me. At the top of this temple was a figure dressed in all black. Think the Red Skull from Infinity War without the face. He looked down at me and said, everything is gonna be all right. Everything is gonna be okay. He said this about 5 times. I didn't think much of it until I went back to school for my junior year of college and had the worst year of my life. I was severely depressed and had bad anxiety, which led to me dropping out. I got home and didn't have a job or anything and was worried about the future. Then I found a job with an awesome company and a promising future. At first it was terrifying, but I believe this is what the man at the top of the temple meant. I've had sleep paralysis for over a decade, either the gory hands and arms reaching through the ceiling and walls at me, or the old man in a rocking chair opposite my bed explaining how he hung himself is probably the creepiest/scariest experiences I've ever had. Imagine being completely paralyzed and waking up to this crap. When I was in high school, I had, pretty sure, swine flu. I found out later that I'd been running a fever of 106 off and on. I was not very lucid for most of the illness, but towards the beginning of it, I remember lying in bed, seeing a circle of dark hooded figures standing around my bed, like the Nazgul from Lord of the Rings. Totally freaked me out. Just hide behind a log. Nazgul can't see you if you're behind a log. I had just pulled into the parking lot of where I worked and was walking towards the building. It was like 3 p.m, broad daylight. All of a sudden, I heard an ambulance's siren start sounding. Naturally, I looked down the road to try and see the ambulance. I see it approaching and decided to watch it for a bit. It was quickly getting closer and it was about to pass right by me. However, there was a large SUV waiting to turn out of the parking lot and onto the road, blocking a few meters of the road from my view. The ambulance passed behind the SUV, probably about 50 feet away from me at most, and I vividly remember the siren being completely silent in that instance. The ambulance had vanished entirely as it passed behind that SUV. I was so confused. The road did not have many cars on it at the time, and it was broad daylight. I did a triple take and made sure that I didn't just miss it. I had a clear view of the road going both directions, and there was no more ambulance to be seen, no more siren either. I walked up and down the road trying to find it for a solid minute, but nope, it was gone. I was well rested, not on drugs, and I didn't have a history of hallucinations. It seems dismissible, but I was completely aware of what happened, and I can't explain it to this day. As someone who used to have such hallucinations, security footage helps a great deal. Also, a pet is really useful. If they aren't responding, I could relax. Yeah, I mean, you say you don't have a history of hallucinations, but maybe now you do? Or maybe you have the superpower to erase ambulances, and frankly, I'm not sure how you could be anything but a villain with that ability, so let's hope your brain just had a hiccup. I am 100% sure I vividly remember a dog that apparently doesn't exist. When I was 16, we lived on the other side of the province, and my uncle had this little Jack Russell named Crew. Crew went missing for several months and then turned up at a humane society over an hour away, and we were all shocked this little dog has made it so far. Anyway, that was almost 20 years ago, and the other day I was talking to my parents and was like, you know, whenever I hear about Jack Russells, I think about Crew and that stunt he pulled. And they had no idea what I was talking about. Insisted my uncle had never had such a dog. I must have dreamed it, etc. Honestly, anyone else who would have remembered this dog has been dead for a long time, and I don't even have any pictures of my uncle. I have absolutely no way to prove this dog existed, but I'm sure that he did. They may have just forgotten. My parents are like this as well. Not that long ago, I was telling them about a letter I'd written to my dad while he was away a few years ago. They both insisted I must have dreamt it, but I found it not long after. Sometimes people can be forgetful. It doesn't necessarily mean Crew didn't exist. Back when I was a kid, I had a dream. A bunch of us kids were playing hide and seek near my house out in the snow. I started digging into the snow to hide and came across a dead girl. The very next day, I was walking home from school, and pretty much in the exact same area I dug in my dream, I saw the girl. Same hair, same face, same jacket. I was across the street, but I kept staring at her while walking. She eventually noticed, and I ran off. Never saw her again. I'm telling you folks, dreams and memory are just super unreliable. There's so many times that you'll have a dream that is vaguely like something you see later in the day, and your brain just rewrites your memory of the dream to be like, that's exactly what was in my dream. Your brain likes things to match up, and it will lie to you to make that happen, especially as a kid. Not saying there isn't something mysterious and inexplicable going on, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't look at this stuff with a critical eye. It isn't creepy, but when I was in high school, I had a dream I was in all-white classroom, totally white, like the ones you would see in a dream, and a girl was sitting in the chair on my side. During the dream, I knew it was a dream because that girl was a senior. We didn't have common classes. About 6 years later, I was at a master class. The sun was shining bright outside, the classroom was very illuminated, and I see this girl on my side. We are doing masters together and having a class in all-white freaking classroom. Of course, I remember the dream at that very moment. 3 times in the last year, I've had a strong feeling to comment to someone about a part of their body. I've not done so because A, they're people I don't see often, and B, it would be weird. But a few weeks after each one of those people were diagnosed with cancer in the part of the body I felt I needed to comment on. If I get that feeling again, I don't care who it is, I'm gonna say something. Hey, I know we don't speak often, but your butt is cancer. Have a great day. So, this has always bothered me. I was 13 years old at the time, and my dad was a coal miner. He worked third shift, known as the hoot owl shift, which was midnight to noon. As such, he got home around 2 p.m. and slept till around 9, got up, had dinner with us, and left for work. My dad was always pretty gruff and constantly yelled at us if my younger brother or I made too much noise and woke him up after getting home from somewhere, which as an adult now I completely understand. So one day I did something to wake him up, I forget what. Anyways, he calls me back to the bedroom and I'm expecting to get a dressing down, but he just looked at me and said, "It's okay, come over here and give me a hug." What 13-year-old boy wants to hug their dad? I kinda squirmed a bit and he followed up with, "What if something happened to me?" And just laid there all grizzled and tired. I didn't hug him. That night there was an accident in the mine. He saved everyone on his crew, including the one person he went back in for. His was the only death, and I'm convinced he knew it was gonna happen. I'll never forget his eyes that day. If someone asked you for a hug, give it to him. I love you, Dad. Oh, this might be hard to explain. I was probably 12 and lived in a big log cabin. One day while my parents were at work, I got in a fight with my brother, 18, who had some anger issues. He chased me through the house and I ran out one door, around our porch, and in through another door. I was going to lock it behind me, but didn't have the time because he was too close behind me. So I slammed the door behind me and kept running. When I glanced back to see if he had made it through the door yet, he was banging on the window of said door and yelling for me to unlock it. The door was locked and there was no way he had locked it because the door could only be locked from the outside with a key, of course. And our parents never gave us keys. There was also no way the door could have accidentally locked when I slammed it behind me because it needed to be fully turned to lock, and usually required some finagling at the end to make it actually lock. I stood there dumbfounded for a few seconds and then ran to a bathroom and locked myself in there. Definitely feel that saved me that day. This didn't happen to me, but to my mother and aunt when they were younger, and to this day it is the creepiest thing I've ever heard. So one day when they were around 16 years old, they were alone in the house for a couple of hours while their mother was out working. I don't remember exactly which one of them noticed this, but one of them walked into the kitchen and was shocked to find that the stove had somehow been ripped open all the way into the oven. My mother described it as if someone had stabbed the top of the oven, slashed it, and then pulled that slash open with their hands. Both of them saw it, and when I asked my aunt about this story, she gave me the same description. Also, this was definitely not a visual hallucination because they swear they reached with their hand from inside the oven to the top through the hole. They both swear they were sober at the time, and I believe them because they were raised in an extremely religious environment, so it's impossible they were drunk or high. When my grandmother got home, they naturally went to show her the slash only to find it was completely gone. The stove was completely normal and there was no sign of a hole ever being there. This experience is probably the only reason why I'm not completely skeptical about the supernatural. I've got other personal experiences of this sort, but they can all be explained rationally one way or another in a way that makes complete sense, but this story is way beyond me. Yeah, the being 16 years old makes this one a bit of a head-scratcher. I know that younger kids are more impressionable to being told a fantastical story like a dream and coming to remember it as if they actually saw it. Heck, I remember floating around the kitchen as a 4-year-old, and my cousin swears he saw me do it because I had told him about it. But at 16, that explanation is a little harder to swallow. My dad's story. So we spent a lot of time growing up by a local creek fishing in my family. My brother and dad were all alone in a meadow around the end of summer, and my brother looks at him and says, "Do you remember when I was big and you were little?" Keep in mind, my brother doesn't talk much at all, and he would be around 4. My dad was obviously creeped out, but was like, "What, buddy?" And my brother said, "When I was big and you were little," and wouldn't elaborate further. My brother has no clue what he was talking about, but apparently we all had a moment like that. All alone with our parents asking if they remember when we were big and they were little. I'm not sure if that's so much a weird glitch in reality, so much as it is 4-year-olds being weirdos who say stuff that is just kind of nonsense. I've had a 5-year-old tell me they were 100 years old and I was only 3 and insist it was true. Trust me, I wasn't like, "What? How can that be?" Not me, but a buddy of mine. We were playing Xbox and we both have Elite controllers which have magnetic joysticks that pop right off so you can switch to another. Well, he tossed his on the bed and went to the bathroom. He came back to find his right joystick missing. I let him use mine because I prefer the longer ones. During the summer, he texted me saying he found it at his dad's house, 150 miles away from where he regularly hangs his hat, his mom's house. Must have gotten it with some laundry. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.